Welcome to Grail Country. This is the latest installment of my gaming series. And my guest today is James Raggi, who is a game designer. And James, where are you talking to me today? I know we have a 10-hour time difference. Is it Norway?
Helsinki, Finland.
Oh, Helsinki, Finland. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right. So, James is the designer of an excellent fantasy role-playing game called Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which I quite like, which unfortunately my group did not like as well as I did. So, and to get to play it as much as I would have liked to, but I thought it was an excellent product. And so James said something recently in one of his videos that really grabbed my attention, a video that my brother-in-law had shared with me. But before we kind of dived into like the main topic that like got James on my radar to want to talk to, I just kind of wanted to like get to know each other a little bit. And so James, like how long have you been a gamer? Like how did you get started gaming and how did that happen?
It would have been right around my birthday, so December 1984.
Hmm.
Uh,
How old were you?
that would have been turning 10 years old.
Okay.
And my mother introduced me to it because she knew I liked, genre movies and Savage Sword of Conan comics.
Oh,
And
that's
yeah, so
yeah.
she introduces me to Dungeons and Dragons. I suspect she was wanting a hobby and she wanted to paint the miniatures, the little lead miniatures from the time. But she was a young single mother of two. And so, hey, maybe see, I've repeated this story, but I've never actually asked her to confirm this. This is all my supposition looking
Sure.
back. But my suspicion is she was a young single mother of two and didn't want to just start this hobby on her own.
Hmm.
So if she can just get Jimmy to get into this stuff, then it's not her hobby. It's just she's just helping her kid's hobby.
Right. All right. So that's
And
kind of,
it's
go ahead.
yeah. And fun thing is I didn't start with the rules. I started with modules like Keep in the Borderlands. I think Village of Hamlet was the other one. Getting the modules before getting the rules. Now, Keep in the Borderlands has stuff that gives you a hint on what the framework is, but doesn't really teach you how to play it. So at first, I was gathering up me and my friends, just opening the map for the Caves of Chaos or the Keep, and we were trying to figure out in the squares how do you put a piece down to fit in one of the squares, and then like rolling a die, like okay, I'm moving one, two, three squares, and so that lasted. But that lasted just a few weeks until I got the red box, the Menser red box basic set, and then it was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense now.
Did you figure out how to play it on your own, or did you like kind of get initiated by another older player?
No, it's on my own. I didn't know anything about anything. It was just getting the books and then shortly after the box set and yeah, figuring out on my own and then trying to recruit people from the neighborhood to actually play. And that was looking back, that was interesting because I grew up in the projects.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to recruit a bunch of trying to recruit a bunch of slum kids to participate in a reading based hobby. So
Yeah. Well,
funny
that's it.
enough, most of my
Go for
players
it.
very quickly ended up coming from outside the neighborhood.
Right. That's not too dissimilar from that. There's a little bit of overlap there with how I got started. And we started playing it pretty close to the same age and close to the same time period. I started playing a year later than you. I was 11. I think I just recently turned 11, in fact. And my mom bought the game for me, although I asked for it. I had really bad asthma when I was a kid, and I had a severe asthma attack, and my mom felt bad for me, and she wanted to buy me something. And I had seen an ad for Dungeons and Dragons in Boys Life magazine, and I'm like, I want that. And so she bought me the Moldvay set. So I started playing in 81, and I was 11, and I actually like I tried to play it with my mom like while I was still in the hospital, and was kind of like I had no idea how to play it really. So, but it so happened like after I got out of the hospital, we had just moved, and the neighbors had a son who was like 3 years older than me, who was in high school, like a freshman in high school, who had been playing, and so he taught me how to play. And oddly enough, I ended up like within 6 months, I ended up running a game at age 11 for a bunch of high school kids. So, because I caught on really quickly. Once it was for me, the confusing bit was like, wasn't that the rules were confusing, but the actual method of play, since I'd never played a game like that at all, it took me, I had to see it in action before. So that's cool that you were able to figure out on your own.
Well, the Menser set has such amazing teaching tools.
Right.
It has the solo adventure and then has the more programmed group adventure sample dungeon. So I think that really helped because later on when I got the other basic rules, the Moldvay or the Holmes, it's like these didn't tell you anything, or the advanced Dungeons and Dragons that doesn't have any teaching tools. I mean, it has the example of play in the Dungeon Master's Guide,
Right.
but I don't know if I had gotten that first as a kid that I would have discovered that method, out of that huge book. So
Right. Right.
I guess I was lucky. If you have no clue what this is, I think the Menser Red Box was the best thing that TSR ever did as far as
Mhm.
getting new people in and
Yeah.
teaching them what is this.
What is this? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you started pretty young, and you just like kept with it. Like when was the first like how when did you first get the when did you first get the notion that like I actually might want to design content for these games myself?
Uh, well, it was during the 80s. Yeah, I was still a kid. I would get like computer games and things, play computer games and things like Ultima,
Hmm.
especially Ultima 4 was the big one for me because it was sort of, I mean, that whole thing was based on D&D to begin with, but by the time Ultima 4 came around, it was more of a unique system. So I would try to reverse engineer the the computer system into pen and paper. Wizard's Crown and Eternal Dagger. That was another you know that had the same mechanics, and so I think, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting, and then you know, uh, and then once I figured out, going to the once I figured out that the place that I bought D&D stuff from would have other games too,
Hmm.
because for the longest time, I think I was buying stuff, getting my stuff from Walden Books, which would have
Hmm.
just D&D as I recall. But once you realize there's like hobby shops, and it's like, ooh, here's other games. Marvel Superheroes was another big one, and then discovering Dragon magazine existed, and then what's in there? It's like, oh, okay, there's this whole thing, and so then once I figured out there were all these other games, I think I stopped trying to do my own and
Hmm.
just wanted to experiment with all sorts of other games. But it always came back to D&D.
What was the first? Okay, that leads me to an interesting question. What was the first game that you picked up that was like not D&D? What was the very first like role playing game
I
other than D&D that you played?
think it was Marvel Superheroes.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me too. Because that was like that was like I think yeah, Marvel Superheroes, I think I played that in like 84, 85.
Hmm.
and I started playing D&D in 81. So yeah, I think that's right for me too. Was also
Or
Marvel.
another possibility was Star Frontiers, and I think that those were both TSR are not a coincidence because maybe the like bookstores, like the Walden books, if they're carrying, D&D, they're maybe also carrying other TSR stuff.
I'm wrong. I played Traveler in 81, like in the same year I started playing D&D, and I think the very first character I made died in character creation, and that turned me off from that game. Like immediately. I think I played it a few other times because the group I was playing with was doing some Traveler. So yeah, it was actually Traveler was my first. But Marvel was my next one after that. And that one I played a lot more of.
Yeah,
So
so yeah, it was just getting more and more into games. I think by the late 80s, I was really excited by GURPS and Champions. Uh, but those were more conceptual because, especially Champions and later the hero system, you have to do so much prep work, and all the NPCs are built on the exact same rules as the player characters, and I felt the need to just custom build everything, and that just gets cumbersome. And all every other game that had from the ones that had unique systems that weren't D&D connected at all,
mhm.
but then lots that were like D&D but this, which always involved more complication
Right. Right.
somehow. I mean, for example, I love the Robotech cartoons, so I get the Robotech RPG, and that's very D&D-ish at first glance. But there's all this other stuff going on, and it's like you get two of your friends, and they're both flying Veritech fighters, and then it's like yes, and then you're attacked by 10 Zentradi battle pods, and how long that combat took, it's just like, hey. So it always came back to D&D because of the simplicity of well, basically most everyone in gaming knew the D&D language, even if they didn't like it, even if they were
Right.
playing another game, they knew what the basic rules and what the stats meant, and so it was an easy game to play with other people. And then you play it long enough, it becomes second nature to you.
I
I
think
remember I was such a geeky kid that all of the attack and saving throw charts in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I had those memorized, at least for low level characters.
yeah.
So all we'd need were some dice, and we wouldn't even need the books in school, and we could play because I was an idiot and decided that I needed to memorize them. But that's the kind of kid I was.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, me too. Same thing. Um, so yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of times people end up returning to D&D even if it's not their favorite game because it's because of that factor of like everyone knows it. And it's like it's always easy to find people to play D&D with as compared to or something D&D adjacent as opposed to something else. Because like my favorite game is Pendragon, but it's like I run Pendragon like since 88. I run Pendragon like on average like once every 3 or 4 years. I'll have a Pendragon game. I'll run the Great Pendragon campaign. The game will last a couple of years, and then I have to wait for the next cycle when I can convince people to do it.
Yeah. But
So
then to circle back to your original question, uh, the idea of then wanting to design my own game happened after D&D third edition came out.
okay.
Because when that came out and I got the three books and then I looked at it and it's like they're going like GURPS in here with the character builds and the gridded combat system. And it's like, ooh, I don't like this anymore.
Right.
and and it was a little bit after that where I realized that people talked about role playing games on the internet. And so then you see that people are making their own games and the idea of small publishers. And I was already doing a metal zine at the time. So it's
Oh,
like, okay,
okay.
I know how to do the printing stuff, although I was printing a newsprint at the time. It's like, yeah, you go to the game store and there's all these expensive games. Well, if I do these cheap little zine format things, my prices will be so low that, I'll sell thousands. I had no idea. And so I set about, trying to design my own system, which was like a sub-GURPSian kind of thing. And then I discovered the Dragon's Foot forums, and it's like, oh yeah, people are still playing old D&D, and this is a thing. And then eventually, the stuff that became the old school Renaissance started happening, like the when Hackmaster came out in 2000 or 2001. That was the ultimate. This is like D&D, but way more stupid, complicated. But then,
Yeah, that's interesting that you say Hackmaster because that's where I would put the origin point too.
yeah, and then Castles and Crusades. That
Right.
that was mostly old D&D, but when the people, it was when Basic Fantasy and Osric came out in the 2000s, and then
Yeah.
it was like, oh yeah,
Right. Yeah.
because it was the system that was like natural to me.
Right.
And I had already, when I moved to Finland, finally moved to Finland permanently in 2005, I think it was. Like one of the first things I did was start a first edition AD&D game group.
Right. Why Finland?
Oh God. I had grown up in Connecticut, so had snow in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
and then ended up living in Florida and then Atlanta. Atlanta got real snow about once a decade. And I had decided that I wanted to live somewhere where there's snow. And instead of just moving north or maybe trying Canada, I had this idea that I was going to hit on girls that were from Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, or Iceland. And I think, well, I think also being a metal fan influenced that. Because if I can get to these places, although
Right.
Iceland would have been rough for that since for geographic reasons, not a lot of stuff going on there as compared to the others. But yeah, so I came up with this insane plan, and then even more insane is it worked. It's like, what even is my life? Yeah, I ended up connecting with this Finnish girl who was working in the U.S. as an au pair. And then she returns to Finland, and then, long story a little bit shorter, we didn't meet until she'd already returned to Finland, and then she came to visit me back in the States. And then we hit it off, and then I followed her to Finland and thought it was great. And so we, yeah, made plans to get married. And reality set in that marriage didn't last all too long because she had already had her she'd already had her adventure doing the working in the US and doing that stuff. And I thought going to Finland was going to be my adventure and start this life of actually doing interesting things instead of just sitting in my room doing the nerd stuff. But she was ready to like completely settle down and family and everything right away. So that was I suppose it's good that we didn't have these intense discussions and deal with this as proper adults. I was 30 by the time, so I should have been more in that mode. But because then maybe I wouldn't have gotten here at all. But it was good that it was really bad and then better again. But I'm still here, and Finland is amazing. And since I got here, whenever I watch the news from the U.S., it's increasingly more and more and more looking like Mad Max. So I'm
Yeah. So, what's the best thing about Finland that you think would surprise Americans?
Oh, um, see, we've got a more. See, I don't follow Finnish politics all that much, so anything I say about. But when I got here, I was most amazed is that my peer group didn't have a lot of money because I
Hmm.
was hanging out with the immigrants in the integration school mostly. Or, it was like a lot of students that were joining my D&D game. People didn't have a lot of money, but nobody was panicked. Like in the US, it was always paycheck to paycheck, and I've never been good with money, and there's always this sense of, well, if you got nothing to fall back on, there's always a sense of panic.
Hmm.
Oh, if I get sick for too long, am I going to get fired? Then what am I going to do about this? And where am I going to live? And all this background stuff. Where Finland didn't have that background sense of panic.
Right. There's no fear of like, will I end up on the streets?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is a very real possibility.
yeah.
Yeah. For people at even higher income levels than you would assume, it really is a very real threat here. And if
Yeah,
enough,
well,
if enough, if a chain, if enough of a chain of catastrophic events happens, even people who are currently middle income could find themselves
yeah,
in pretty
because
bad straits.
as you make more money, you create a life that requires that more money to maintain.
Yeah.
And as someone that's had ups and downs in lifestyle, shall we say, it's like if you're used to being here
Hmm.
and you're good with it, if you reach back here, if you reach up to here, if you fall back to here, it feels like an absolute catastrophe. So
Hmm.
it's yeah.
So was Lamentations the first game that you published, or
Uh,
did you?
Published, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
but
mean,
you
I
designed stuff before that. It wasn't the first thing you designed, but the first thing you published.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay. What was the first thing you designed? Just
First thing, like that wasn't intended to be anything except for my game group. It was something in the '80s, those video game reverse
gotcha,
engineering.
gotcha,
Tried to do
gotcha,
that.
gotcha.
And then that GURPSian thing, I got to the point of sending out like playtest documents in the early 2000s. But that didn't go anywhere because it was just basically trying to be D&D with a more GURPSian kind of character build skill system thing. It had no anything to it. There was,
Right.
I mean, the if you're going to try to enter the market, then just trying to market yourself as, oh yeah, I'm going to be the cheap alternative is you need more than that.
Right. Right. Okay, so yeah, you need more than that. So Lamentations, obviously, you've had some success with. So let's talk about like what was the genesis like? What gave you the first what first gave you the idea for what became Lamentations, and why do you think it worked, whereas the other project before didn't really didn't really hit home?
um, well, the what was the first thing? It would have been that first.
Yeah,
No, it would have been
so
the
okay.
creature generator. The random esoteric creature generator was the
Yeah,
first thing that came
yes.
out. I designed that when I was living in the dorm of the integration school that I went to because I had already separated from my first wife. Uh, and I was in a very angry place. And so I created a monster generator for old school, OSR and D&D games that was very angry.
Hmm.
That was very angry. I mean, the introduction, geez, uh, but also had more of a horror element to it. And that was right already there from the start. I had friends that tell me what they're scared of, and it's like, oh, I'm going to commission artwork that shows that. So that was already there from the very beginning. Even if I wasn't thinking of it as a horror thing, I'm thinking of, okay, this is a monster generator. What are you trying to do with monsters that you would want new, unusual monsters maybe at a moment's notice? Monsters should be scary, and unknown monsters are even scarier than known quantities. And that sold almost nothing immediately because who was I and trying to get people to pay for something with shipping from Finland. But Goodman Games wanted to publish a professional version. And because I'd sent copies to like everyone that was doing anything old school.
Mhm.
And Goodman Games was had published. They had taken one of their third edition Dungeon Crawl classics and done a conversion to 1E for, I think it was a convention special. So anyone doing old school publishing at the time, I sent a copy of that original creature generator. So and then it's like, oh, I'm going to be a published author that has stuff in game stores, and then I met the person that became my second wife, and my integration schooling came to an end, not quite successfully. I can read Finnish at a crappy level, but usually functional day to day. But I I know how to speak at a very, very basic level. At least I think I do. But whenever I try saying anything, nobody understands me and they switch immediately to English. And I can understand like 3-word sentences. See spot run. It's like I would understand that. But when people are having full conversations, it's like I'm picking out words here.
Well,
So
Finnish is a non-Indo-European language, so that's a
I
tough.
know.
That's a tough bar. So don't feel too bad.
I've been here almost 20 years right now,
Yeah,
so I do kind of feel bad, but it's like, well, what am I going to do? Just not, especially now, with my job is writing and publishing in English. What am I going to do? Just really stop all English and totally immerse myself. I'm not a very social person to begin with.
gotcha.
So, and I remember when I moved in my second wife, we made the decision, okay, let's not speak English at all. Let's help me learn. And that lasted a few hours before she was just screaming, "It's a spoon! Say it right! Lucy, no, you're saying it wrong." How are we on swearing on this channel, by the way?
No problem. I
Okay,
swear all
yeah.
the time.
Okay, okay. So,
I'm not one of those kind of Christians.
okay, well,
Okay.
we didn't have a lot of pre-show prep, so thought I'd ask. So, yeah, but anyway, I had to figure out what am I going to do. And Finland, I don't know if they still do, but they had this program helping foreigners start new businesses.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, well, what if I try to get them to pay me? And it wasn't a big amount. It was like 500 euros a month for 6 months, and then you can get an extension to that. It's like, if I got that, then I could pretend to be a role playing publisher for 6 months and not have to try to find a real job. And, I have 6 months of doing this other thing. And then a funny thing happened on the way to trying to not have a real job. The stuff I produced, people seemed to like. I mean, I like to say that I was scamming the Finnish government into believing I could be an RPG publisher, but it wasn't exactly a scam because I was making the stuff that I said I was going to make, doing the stuff. But I believed everybody at the time, saying, "Oh, you can't make a living doing this. You can't do that." Blah blah blah. Especially in the old school scene, no one's making. The only person that was really attempting to make money at that time, I think, was Dan Proctor with Labyrinth Lord, because he was. Osric was just a free download at the time
Mhm.
to allow other people to do stuff. Basic Fantasy is always an at cost, print on demand kind of thing.
Yep.
Swords and Wizardry, yeah, that would have already been around, but again, it didn't have big commercial ambitions at the time. But Dan Proctor was trying to set up Labyrinth Lord to go through distribution, but that's all that was really going on in the old school. I mean, people like Rob Kuntz was releasing commercial adventures, but that was kind of just the old school niche. Goodman Games, this was before the DCC game. They were releasing variants for like conventions. So no one was really trying to do this full time, except Proctor was getting his feet wet. So I didn't think anything was going to come of this. I think, oh, do some stuff, not have to get a job for 6 months, and people started liking it. Then I got the extension for another 3 months for the grant, and it's when I put together the first box set, the deluxe box set, and that caught on, and then once that started selling, and I think I only made like 500 of those, I decided, okay, maybe I can make a go of this. And my wife was like, yeah, people are buying this. And I made the decision once I decided, okay, I really am going to try to do this. That's when I decided to go all Grindhouse. The second edition of the game was going to be the Grindhouse set to really pump up the horror and the heavy metal. And and with that Grindhouse set, that Zach Smith's Vornheim was released with that. We're looking at 2011. By this point, April 2011, Grindhouse box set and Vornheim, which was an experimental, weird thing. That with the one thing that seemed to blow everybody's mind is it's a hardcover book with a dust jacket that had printing on the inside of the jacket. The printer seemed to think that was the wildest idea. Why would you want to do that? And it's like, ooh. And then those took off. And it just went from there that suddenly I was running a business. And okay.
Someone who
Even
just told me earlier that they're not good with money finds himself
yeah,
running a business.
yeah. And that's been the history. It's been a bunch of luck, some good ideas, and some talent. And from there, everything year on year, from 2001 all the way to 2009, everything just built and built and built to the point, I would say, especially 2017 and 2018, I was making a lower middle class income from
Which,
being a game publisher, which is amazing. And
yes.
I was so afraid of having money at that point that I was giving away tons of money in advances because it's like, oh, it's the end of the year and I have this big pot of money. I'm going to get taxed to hell on this. Here, you have an advance. You have an advance. And that when problems hit in 2019, it's like, wow, I could have used a lot of that money, even if even if the taxes had been taken out of it. But it's been a struggle since then. But we're still here. This summer will be 15 years, and it's when you're not having hit books anymore. It's not just oh, let's get a book out and then you can sit back and relax for a little bit before deciding your next one. It's oh. now I got to fucking work for a living. Oh, that's not why I got into this, but
Got to come up with the next thing. Yeah.
it's still working for a living doing this is I used to have real jobs. This is even when it's rough, this is better.
Yeah. 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 So what happened in 2019?
2019, our best-selling author Zach Smith got accused by his ex of abuse and all that stuff, and 5 years later, that's still an ongoing issue with stuff and everything. It's yeah, I just I got caught up in that because I'm
Guilt by
not
association.
well, it's guilt by association and the fact that I don't say the things you're supposed to say.
Mm.
I don't. I'm a weirdo, and it's good when you're. It's good until something really important happens where people insist you have to be on their side and you have to say the correct things, and I'm just like, no, no, I don't think that, and so then you pay a price for not being in the cool kids corner anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So I think that's a good time to like segue into the thing that I actually wanted to really dive into. And so it's my brother-in-law sent me this video that you did recently,
Uh-huh.
and you were kind of like analyzing the OSR and talking about the different groups of people that one finds in the OSR. But one of the things that you hit on in that video, you're literally the only other person I've heard say. But I've been saying this is something I've been saying for a long time, that there is a way in which part of what drives, I think, a good portion of the OSR is a rejection of modernity. And you can see this in that, like the OSR in its conception, it's inherently a rejection of the myth of progress,
Hmm.
which is absolutely critical for modernity. Modernity just assumes the myth of progress is almost like a fundamental axiom. And the OSR is fundamentally questioning that because it's the latest edition isn't necessarily the best.
Hmm.
Which, if the myth of progress holds, then obviously whatever is the newest edition is better than what came before it.
Yeah.
And so the OSR is fundamentally questioning that. But at the same time, what's interesting is that it's also a very creative space. So it
Hmm.
finds a way to kind of like work within. I actually sometimes I compare it to like what good orthodox icon painters do, because there's a difference in quality in icon painters, right? So they're working within this tradition that has these very like fixed guidelines, and yet they find a way to be very individually creative within that set of guidelines, which is kind of what you see going on in the OSR, where it's like it realizes that you can have tradition without it necessarily eliminating creativity.
Right. Okay. This is where I'm getting in the deep waters because
Okay, go for it.
I made the observation, and now I'm. It's like, yes, I see this. Why is this? Uh, let's make stuff up off the top of my head and find out how right it is. Well, it's true because I was one of the people arguing for the OSR, and there were all sorts of people that were horrified. I remember when Hackmaster won an award back in 2000, 2001, there were, you know, current game designers that were horrified that this throwback joke was winning an award, and but and some of it is nostalgia.
Mhm.
I think it's nostalgia more for players than designers because designers are necessarily doing something new with the old thing. But one of the things I was always saying is, not all change is progress,
Mhm.
and that role playing games were part tool, a hammer you can make all sorts of you can make all sorts of advances, but in tools and how you do things, construction wise, craft wise, but sometimes you just need a hammer.
Right.
And you can craft what metal you're making it out of, how you manufacture the handle, that can all be customized, but it's a hammer. And a hammer is fine. Everyone should have a hammer in their house. Or when it comes to artwork, there are classic paintings, there are classic films, and no, nobody that's an adult is going to say that every new movie that comes out is you can assume is better than any movie that's ever come out before. No one that's an adult is going to say that you know, all new music that comes out is better than all music before. I mean, when you're a kid, a teenager, maybe you're thinking that because this is your time and these are the things that are forming your tastes and everything. So maybe you think, yeah, this is the best ever because it's kind of yours.
Hmm.
But you get in your 30s and your 40s and beyond, and you realize, yeah, some cool stuff comes out. And maybe, just maybe, you see a new movie that's like, this might be the best movie I've ever seen. Or, oh, this album that just came out might be the greatest album that's ever been, but that's going to be exceedingly rare. And you're going to look at most of what comes out and think, well, it's all a bunch of garbage. And it's going to be the same thing with role playing games.
Hmm.
It's if the engine works, it works. And just because it's newer and more supported and promoted by big corporations doesn't mean it's better. That's same principle.
Hmm. Hmm. So yeah, it's like you actually the when you have something that has an excess of novelty, that's actually a bad thing because people won't even recognize it. There has to be, you have to balance novelty with that which is recognizable in order to have something that resonates, which I think maybe this is, I think if we look at your like Lamentations, I think let's use Lamentations as an example, right? So you're building on a core rule set that is like your hammer, right? It's very well known, it's very familiar, but you're giving it this aesthetic sensibility that is like very different, that's very much its own. So it's like you're combining something that is familiar with something that is gives it some innovation and some novelty and some creativity.
It's I think it's just a combination of other things because my mother also introduced me to horror movies
Hmm.
way too early. And the idea of what's normal, I never had a chance. I mean, I was an introverted book nerdy kid in the projects. I didn't fit in. My mother was showing me ridiculous horror movies as soon as we had a VCR, and it's some of the stuff it's like cool, and then some of the stuff was like, Mom, should you be showing me this? But that's still, and when I joke about that with her now. She's like, "Well, look what happened. You're doing a thing now. It's all because of me. You're welcome." But and then later when I got into heavy metal, a lot of that has the same horror aesthetic, and so it's not like I mean, hopefully some of the stuff I do and the combinations that I put it together are inventive, or I produce other people doing inventive things. But the basic idea of accentuating the horror that has always been underneath the Dungeons and Dragons system, I mean, that to me, that's the most obvious and natural thing in the world to do. I
Hmm.
mean, in the game fiction, what is your character experiencing? Well, either experiencing or doing to bring another living creature down to 0 hit points.
Mhm.
What would that look like in the fiction? You're either, if you're bashing them over the head with a mace, stabbing them or slashing them with a sword, it's going to be ugly. And the basic premise of old school play. It's like we're going to be these ragtag bunch of people who we're not farmers, we're not, we don't want the normal life. We want fame and fortune. So we're going to get together with all the this stuff that we can gather. We're going to go into this dark hole where, unnatural monsters are going to try to kill us so we can take some gold out. That's a horror show. That's completely a horror show where you're regularly going to be running into magic. That's basically you're going into places where in dealing with situations where the basic rules of physics no longer apply. And just think about that as a human being just thinking, my job at the accounting firm sucks. So I'm going to go get a gun down at the local gun shop, and then I'm going to drive to this place where I expect a lot of people to try to kill me so I could get some money, take some money out of there. And oh yeah, the rules of physics are going to, warp while I'm in there. And this is expected and this is the life it's like, what? This is insane. So you
Mhm.
just take that insanity and make it, instead of it being like the unspoken thing happening underneath the adventure you're having,
Mhm.
just bring that up in the surface and make that the main thing that you're doing. So I guess it's a little bit of deconstruction,
Mhm.
but it's still just horror is its own thing as well. So it's just taking this engine that was created for heroic adventure fantasy
Mhm.
and just highlighting the horrors underneath it. Yeah.
Mhm. Which were just evident to you that they should be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because there's a way in which like the classic style of play, it's like it can render something that should have the feeling that you're talking about and kind of render it mundane.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, it's understandable. I mean, different people like different things, and like okay, like the classic adventure fiction that D&D is based on, the fantasy fiction.
Mhm.
A lot of people go to Lord of the Rings as the go-to, but that wasn't really the main thrust when the game was created. But look at how, Lord of the Rings is versus like Conan the Barbarian, the original
Right.
Robert E. Howard stories. And Conan is such a powerful force that even when he's dealing with the most horrific situations, because of who he is and the focus on him as a main character, those aren't horror stories. But then you take, for example, Solomon Kane, same author, much different atmosphere.
Mhm.
And one of the guiding principles when I was like really starting to figure out this is what Lamentations is going to be, one of the keywords was Solomon Kane is cooler than Conan.
Mhm.
And so it's just using the little dials in what are we wanting to accentuate, what is the experience we're wanting the players to have. And we do everything from Lovecraftian mind-bending horror to cannibal holocaust, just depravity, and oh my god, what is wrong with you? To Evil Dead 2 style slapstick comedy horror. So
Mhm.
there's still a wide breadth of what you can do when you decide that you're gonna.
So all the fun stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a yeah. When you mentioned earlier, Savage Sword of Conan, I think I spent almost all my allowance on Conan comics, including Savage Sword of Conan when I was that age too. So I could
And like
definitely.
some of that 70s stuff, I mean, the the standards of what you were allowed to do in the 70s
Mhm.
versus the 80s or versus today.
Right.
I like a lot of 70s stuff, even stuff I never encountered as a kid.
Hmm.
Because today the word I keep that keeps entering my head, it seems so damn irresponsible. It's like people just didn't care. They had an idea, they're gonna do an idea. So, you know, Savage Sword of Conan is going to be putting out comic book magazines with nudity and gore. You know, early Dungeons and Dragons is, you know, like the Dungeon Master, all the AD&D books. You know, there's nudity in those books. Dungeon
Hmm.
Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. They got boobs. When you're a 10-year-old kid in the Reagan '80s, that's something.
We had a friend whose mom put like covered up the boobs on the succubus in the monster manual, like put like little taped little like cardboard or not cardboard but construction paper like over it.
But that's in, well, my mother with like the horror stuff she was showing me. You know, she
Right.
didn't care about that sort of stuff, but you know what the culture is telling you is okay or not. And
Hmm.
so when you're a little kid seeing some of that D&D stuff that has not kid stuff in it, you know, especially when what did the books say? Did the books say ages 8 and up or age 12 and up that's got this stuff in it? But you know, when you're a kid, you know when you're being softballed, you know when you're being talked down to. So when you have something that's popular with kids that isn't doing that, it's like, oh, this has more respect for me, so I like it more. It's treating me as a full person.
Right.
Robotech was the same way as a cartoon.
Right.
Very, very few cartoons that were on in the morning are going to feature death as a normal part of the thing. I remember when Roy Fokker died in the cartoon. It was just like, oh my god, they just killed like a main character. Oh my god.
Hmm.
But it's
Hmm.
cool because this isn't a kid's story. This is a real story that's being presented to us kids, and me and other people, we loved it for it. It was not, it wasn't holding back. It wasn't GI Joe where they blow up everything and then, oh, there's the little parachute in the
Right.
background. Oh, it didn't kill it.
Right. Yeah, no one
There's
dies.
same thing like Transformers the movie,
Right.
where
I remember
where
that. Yeah.
they what they were wanting to do was retire the old toys to introduce new toys, but the kids experienced it as, oh, all our friends we've been following for a few years are getting slaughtered.
Yep.
And but
Yep.
as a kid, crying when Optimus Prime died. The
Yep.
parents are horrified that this cartoon is upsetting their children, but the kids are like are feeling adult emotions basically
Hmm.
at this stupid toy commercial. It was the people cared about the story and were giving the kids a real war story
Hmm.
that that
Oh
that
yeah, I remember crying in the theater.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
for
easier to
sure.
digest because it's robots, but
Yeah.
it's still the robots that have been your friends if you've been watching the
Hmm.
show for a couple of years at that
Yep.
point. And
Yep.
the that really, as a kid, that's a big thing when you realize the difference between a story that feels like it's telling you more truth versus ones that are, trying to pat you on the head.
Hmm. Right, which is like I think this is like this kind of goes into like well what it kind of goes into talking about like well what kind of content should be in your games. It's the same principle, right? If you and so I think a lot of I think a lot of games these days like tend toward the sanitized.
Yeah, well, it ebbs and flows. There's, it'll be wild times where you wonder how could people get away with that? I mean, just last night I was watching Red Letter Media is doing a review of Showgirls
Hmm.
and what that was supposed to be.
Okay.
And it didn't do well, but it was still the situation in the 90s where a major studio could make, a serious attempt at making an NC-17 movie. And I remember being very disappointed in the movie at the time because the movie is not supposed to be just like a big budget go see it in a normal theater porno movie, but of course
Hmm.
that's kind of how it was marketed. So I
Right.
show up with my date saying, this is the kind of thing we're in for, and it gives you something else. I think
Mhm.
that's one reason that the movie didn't do well. But yeah, and again, what you're able to get away with in the late 2000s, early 2010s is a lot different than now. I mean,
Hmm.
even I was just I watched The Kingsman
Hmm.
this past weekend. Hadn't seen it since seen it in the theater when it came out in 2015, and just some of the language just in the church scene. It's like you don't see that much anymore. You don't have the yeah. It's like these days, if somebody's going to be dropping the N bomb,
Hmm.
it's seen as a more serious thing. Whereas even just that few years ago, it's like, okay, this is a racist character, so he's going to be given a sermon and he's just going to be
Hmm.
rattling off all the slurs, and it was just part of the thing. And it's like, yeah, cool. That's
Right. Yeah. So yeah.
if you,
What can we portray in our fiction? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it
So.
was absolutely, you're supposed to despise these people, and they were doing the things that made you despise them without the filter. And it's like we've been for the past few years in the cycle where people want the filters, and I've I'm not good at the filters myself, so I guess that's another reason the past few years have been a struggle. But there's no point in doing this if you're not going to do it genuinely.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, even at its my most successful, it's still risky and still unstable. And if I wanted the stability, if I wanted the filter, if I wanted to do the thing that people wanted, then I might as well just go get a normal job and have a boss saying you need to do this, this, and this, and have stability. But I don't do that because the idea of what's this crazy thing I can think of, or what's this crazy thing that someone's presented to me that they want to do. And it's like, yeah, let's do this to the max and see what happens.
So, do you have anything interesting in the hopper?
Yes. Oh, by the way, we completely got sidetracked at the rejection of modernity.
Totally fine. I just went with the
Yeah,
flow of the conversation, man. It's all
yeah,
good.
yeah. This spring, hopefully, we're finishing stuff up. There's several things. The big one, the one that's effectively we're just dealing with the production and what it's going to look like. Like it's the biggest project Lamentations has ever done. Let's see if I can remember the title off the top of my head. A True Relation of the Virginia Disastrum 1633. It's basically an an interdimensional portal opens up in the wilderness outside of Jamestown, the Jamestown colony, and it's yeah, so you have like the historical adventure, you've got all the weird stuff that's happening and all the stuff spilling in. You have a number of alternate dimensions that are detailed. And it's the biggest thing we've ever done. It's going to be a 3 book set, all packaged together. And yeah, that's what when we have a release date and to have stuff more finalized of how we're going to package this and then I'll be giving a lot more details. But that is the next thing, and that's within the next few months. That's the big one, and then hopefully I get my thing finished. The layer, no, that's someone else. Yeah, and since that one should be more acceptable to general audiences, it's not the deep grindhouse thing. The thing I have is going to be it's going to be a dungeon crawl adventure called Don't Fuck the Priest. And that's just going to be all out insanity. If you're at all sensitive to anything, that's probably not going to be the one you want to pick. We got Lair of the Brain Eaters. That's it's a shorter adventure that's basically a big sword and sorcery kind of atmosphere. And then maybe something else will be coming out in that batch, but that's still a bit up in the air. But those are the three things. That Don't Fuck the Priest is going to be a little box set. It's going to have special dice and deck of cards and how generate stuff in the adventure. 3 book set for the Disastrum. Lair of the Brain Eaters, just going to be a standard smaller book as far as presentation. But yeah, that's those are the main things being worked on. Then there's other stuff more in the background for later on. So.
I noticed that the first one you mentioned, it said in that you seem to often like to work in that 17th century early modern time period. What is it about that era that you find appealing? That ties into the Solomon Kane thing you said earlier too, which is also set in that same period.
Yeah, it's I figure it's the absolute worst time to have ever been alive.
It's true. Yeah,
The
yeah,
the horrors of the age seem to be so universal and touching every single place on the globe that it's perfect background radiation for horror adventures, because
yeah.
even in all the atrocities of the modern day,
Mhm.
they're not everywhere at once. Even World
Right,
War II, with all the horrible things that happened during that,
right.
there were places in the world where you can just live your life. You were
Mhm.
affected by the war, but you could live your life, and it's not at your door. But there, the 17th century, it something was always at your door, whether it's the religious extremism and purges, or the plague and famine. The little ice age was happening, uh, colonization, and the beginnings of the slave trade, of the Atlantic slave trade. But and the different cultures all really doing the formal meeting, and now we're an interconnected world for the first time, and all of the horrible thing that brings, because everybody was killing each other within their own cultures. What are you going to do when you're meeting a strange culture?
It's also a peak era for occultism too, because it's right before the Enlightenment. So it
Yeah,
kind which lends itself to that kind of supernatural horror kind of thing too,
yeah,
because
well,
it's such peak occultism.
yeah. One thing I try to do, though, and in other, some of the authors I work with have different ideas, is I try not to treat any actual historical belief system or cult system as being real.
Right.
It's like the magic system of the game is the real magic. And it's because I'm not, I mean, I'm a materialist atheist. So I think of occultism as basically just spooky meditation.
Mhm.
I don't think of it as having, you're not unleashing any real power. I think, and then religion, it's again depending on how you practice it. It could be, meditation, but it's like life philosophy. But
Right.
I don't believe that there is, this supernatural force
Right.
that's created or judging us or what have you. So I so to me, to decide that nothing that people really believed back then was real is like, to me, that's the modern world too. So
Right.
that's easy. But then it's like the game magic that's like the real supernatural stuff. But again, some of the authors take a different tack. But one thing I always insist on is that the events of history
Hmm.
happened the way we understand it up until the point the game starts.
Right.
And
Okay.
then things can change. It's like one thing that annoys me about Doctor Who, the TV
Okay.
show,
Yeah.
is that absolutely anything that's ever happened in human history, aliens. It's like no history just happened.
Right. Right.
And that annoys me for some reason. So
Yeah.
I don't want to do that with real world history for my game. It's like all the historical events happened as we understand them historically. And you can set up things where once the game starts, maybe there are forces that are wanting to change history as we know it, because once you start playing the game, you shouldn't be bound by real world history. You can change things, but from anything before your game starts, it's like let history be history, and all the supernatural horror stuff is out on the fringes and the edges, like real like horror stories. Like Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't take place on an alternate Earth because there's a dream demon. It's
Right.
supposed to take place on our Earth, and there's this hidden thing that kills people. And
That's good for two reasons, I think, because first of all, it takes some load off of you as a designer because you don't have to try to invent in a complete alternate history. You can just say, look, history is what it was up until the point where we start the game. So that takes some load off of you there from a design standpoint. But then it also, because anything that happens from that point on is open season, you're still maximizing player agency to impact the world. So I think that's a great way to do it. That makes sense to me. Well, thanks for joining me this evening. This was worth staying up late for. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed meeting you,
it's worth
James.
getting up early for.
Yeah. Can you want just before we wrap this up? Do you want to tell people like where they can find your products?
Okay, go to LOTFP.com. It'll have links to our US and European web stores, plus a link to our store on drive-through. We work with some retailers, so check to see if you can get our stuff at your local game store. And yeah, that's and all the social media links. You can find it off the main website.
Do you ever make it out to cons in the States?
Yeah, we this year I'm planning to do North Texas RPG convention
I'll see
and
you
Gen.
there.
Yes.
I'll see you there. All right. See you in Texas. Thanks
See you
for the
then.
talk, and look forward to talking again. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yep, you bet.